All right, guys, welcome back to the channel. In the last episode, we were working on my 1989 Buick LeSabre. We got the front air suspension designed, fabricated, installed in the car. Indeed, we got a chance to see it air up and down for the very first time. In today's episode, we're moving to the back and we're gonna get the rear air suspension designed, fabricated, and installed. Also, yeah, I'm really excited about this Buick LeSabre series on the channel, way more than I ever thought I would be. So let's get into it. All right, guys, it is a beautiful day here in New Hampshire, end of May. Nice weather's finally here. Winter's finally over. Well, it's a nice day today. Today, we are working on the rear suspension of the LeSabre. We got a little detailed on the front suspension. Really stoked on how this is coming out. So I'm excited to get to the rear today. So as we left the last episode off, we are basically laying the engine cradle on the pavement. As it sits now, we are about an inch off the ground with the engine cradle, but with the wheels and tires I'm gonna be putting on this car, it's a smaller overall diameter and it's gonna get us that drop immediately to lay the engine cradle out. So I'm gonna leave the suspension set where it's at for right now until we get the wheels on the car and we do an alignment and final suspension adjustment and all of that. So if you haven't seen that episode yet and you're interested in an H-body GM car air suspension setup, jump back, watch that episode. I'm gonna talk about all the parts we're using. To recap, the front air suspension I started with was 2005 to 2007 Subaru WRX STI Super Low kit from Bag Riders. We had to make a new top hat that would bolt into the strut tower of the LeSabre, and we transferred over the lower dropouts off of the factory strut assemblies and welded them on to the Subaru ones. So the fronts have gone from a Subaru kit to a full bolt-in Buick LeSabre or H-body GM car front air suspension kit. And that brings us into the parts we're gonna be using for the rear of this car. I've talked over and over again how much I really like single bellow airbags. I've used them all over the years in many of my own cars. Dual bellow airbag, single bellow, sleeve bag. And I think my favorite for a mid-size car, for the weight and wheelbase of a car like this, I really like a single bellow airbag. I feel like they ride really well at a low ride height, at a low PSI number. So that's what we're gonna be using in the rear of the LeSabre as well. We're gonna be using Universal Air's Airhouse 2 bags. I use these bags in the rear of the roof-chopped Corvair, my Monza that I've had for well over a decade, and I really like the way these things ride. I've had a Mercedes 190E with these bags in it. Many other cars. And since we're using a single bellow airbag in the front of the LeSabre, I wanted to continue using a single bellow in the rear. Now, although I don't recommend it, nor does anyone else for that matter, I've had the Airhouse 2 bags in the back of the Corvair for over 10 years. We put those bags in the spring of 2014, and they're still there today. Now that is way beyond the recommended life of an airbag in a car, but they still hold air and the car still performs as it should. So since I've had the same set in the Corvair for over a decade, I really trust in the quality of these airbags. So that's what we're using in the LeSabre. And if you're bagging one of these cars, or any car at all for that matter, there's a discount code link also in the description that will help you save 10% off anything you order from bagriders.com as well. I always forget to plug that, so anyway, there's stuff in the description. Go check it all out. Let's bag a LeSabre. Okay, so this is the stock spring out of the rear of the Buick LeSabre. And this is what we're replacing it with. So essentially in today's episode, we're gonna design and build everything necessary to go around this to replace this. And as you can see, we're gonna have quite the difference. Now, a universal bag like this is great because you can basically make it work in anything that you want, as long as you can make the brackets and cup kit or whatever necessary to bolt to the bag to put it in the application that you need. So the airhouse 2 bag has multiple mounting holes on the top here. This big one here is actually for your fitting. It's a 1/2-inch NPT port where we'll actually put our fitting to put the air into the airbag. And on the bottom here, we also have 5 more ports that are threaded. These are usually 3/8 16. I do believe that's what these are. So you've got these holes on the bottom that are threaded and these holes up top to basically mount whatever brackets we make to the airbag. Okay, so as the car sits in the rear now, we're just sitting on the stock shock. We've got the springs out, as you've already seen in the last couple episodes, and where it sits right now is just sitting on the stock shock. Now, we're going a little bit lower up front, and where the sills sit off the floor right now is not gonna change much, because we're not going totally to the wall with this car. We're not gonna chop it up. We're not gonna raise the engine cradle. This whole project started as I want a daily driver one of these cars, and I want to bag it, but I want to do it in like a cool way with some cool wheels. This project is not supposed to steer all of my attention away from some of my bigger projects I've got here in the shop. So with that being said, I'm not going to pull the motor. I'm not going to raise the subframe. It'd be cool to do that to one of these cars, but that's not what I'm going to do. So knowing that the engine cradle is about 1 inch from touching the floor, if that, our sills here aren't going to go too much lower. Right? This is going to come down like another inch maybe. I do want to go a little bit lower to basically get it so it'll sit level. Like when that front goes down another inch, I want this to go at least another inch as well. All right, so I've set out my car stands. I haven't welded on any pieces of angle iron on the edges yet to keep something from rolling off, but this thing's in park and we're going to keep the lift arms under it. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to set the car down on these and allow the suspension to compress all the way. So I've got more room to crawl into the car so I can pull easier measurements without it being actually on the floor as to what our measurements are gonna be from the control arm to our upper perch when the car is aired out, right? When the control arm is all the way up. What's our overall space? Because we need to fit this airbag in there. I've taped over the fitting right now, but ultimately when this is fully compressed, it compresses to about 2 inches. Ultimately, this bag is going to go in here, and I need to make an upper bracket with room for my fitting and my airline to come out, and a bracket on the bottom that'll fit in the control arm. So with how small this will compress, I need to deduce that number by what I need to make for a top bracket and a lower bracket. This is as far as the shock can extend, so this droop here is as high as the car will be able to go. All right, so some of the pieces I plan to use, or some of the dimensions of pieces I plan to use on making our brackets for these rear bags are some of these. This here is a 4-inch outer diameter piece of pipe. I've got a bunch of this here in stock, and this best fits over the top and bottom plates of the airhouse 2 bag. Now, this diameter pipe is too small to fit in the car, and I'll show you why that is. All right, we're back at the car, and we're looking at the lower control arm. Now you can see inside the lower control arm, this raised piece right here that the spring sat around. And this allowed the spring to stay in place, right? It held it in place. It allowed the spring to not move around at all. And that there, we want to fit something that fits over that. Well, this 4-inch piece of pipe won't do that. We'd put a plate on the bottom with a piece of threaded rod that would pass down through here, and then on the underside have like a big washer with a nut on it and hold it to the lower control arm. You know, there's all sorts of different things that we could do, but I just don't like the way that this doesn't quite fit over the center of that control arm. Same with the top here. It just won't fit over it. I'm gonna use some of this 5.5-inch outer diameter pipe. This is technically known as a 5-inch pipe because it's a 5-inch ID, inner diameter, with a 1/4-inch wall. So you have a 1/4 inch and a 1/4 inch. And when you measure across, that gives you an extra 1/2 inch. 5-inch inside means 5.5-inch outside. But the importance of this piece, now this is just a small piece I cut off to do some testing in the car with, is this here is the upper spring perch dampener for the spring. The stock spring sits in this, and then this fits up into the upper perch, and this allows the spring to not squeak against the metal of the car. These two fit perfectly, like perfectly. The outer diameter of the stock spring is 5.5 inches. And the same with the lower control arm. This fits in there just like the spring does on the lower control arm. We're gonna go to the computer and we're gonna design a flat plate here that'll have 2 holes to mount and a bigger hole for our fitting. Okay, well, I used to have an Airhouse 2 bag plate CAD file saved on my computer. But the computer that runs my laser machine crashed last year, and it had been a while since I'd backed everything up onto my external hard drive. So I lost almost everything. So after looking through a few thumb drives and a few external hard drives I did not find this anywhere. So we got to do it from scratch. But that's okay, because if you guys are interested in seeing this process, I've got to go through it once more. So let's design some Universal Airhouse 2 bag plates. All right, well, I've got my designs put together, and the way I did it was I basically just started with my overall diameter of the pipe we're going to use, because that's the size of plate I want to meet to it. And then in the center of that plate, we needed at least 2 of our mounting points, which I decided on the farthest out because our plate's going to go up beyond this. So we might as well have the widest footprint possible for mounting. And that measurement was 2 3/4 inches, which is what these 2 holes are here. And they're right in the center, so that was easy enough to locate. So what I'm gonna do now is we'll turn the laser machine on and we'll cut these out of cardboard first, as I always do. And then we'll mate the cardboard up. We'll mate up this to the cardboard, make sure everything looks right, make sure we can get our hardware and fitting in there. And if all that looks good, we'll bounce this down and we'll go out to the CNC plasma table and we'll start cutting out of steel. All right, let's see what our first pre-pro cardboard test cut looks like. Yeah, we'll center that. Obviously our pipe will be whatever length we measure in the car that we'll need. So that overall diameter looks good. And now, the most crucial part, I think we're good. I think we're good. All right, we've got our file set up, ready to go. I still have this sheet of 3/16 plate on the table. I really don't need to make it out of 3/16. This is just the top plate for the airbag. You know, we could get away with using 1/8 basically, but I don't have any 11 gauge or 1/8 inch plate here, and the 3/16 is already on the table. They'll be beefy, but they'll be built well. I don't mind overbuilding stuff. So we're gonna cut it right out of this 3/16 plate. Well, we had an issue mid-operation, and I could have sworn I was good on my tip, but I took the torch out of the guide, out of the bracket, and inspected further. Look at this. That is not good for anyone. It blew the tip right apart. We were long overdue. So let's, which drawer? Okay, here we go. I think this is the 60 here. Let's replace everything while we're at it, shall we? All right, we are back in business. New consumables in the torch head. We'll put it back together. That is a much cleaner cut than that. I probably should have changed my tip a long time ago. Oh, look at that. That is what you want right there. Barely any dross on the back too. All right, we got our plate done. Well, this plate will work, and the inch-long 3/8/16 bolts I have will work with the lock washers and the thickness of the plate, so we've got the hardware we need. And our fitting will thread down through our hole as well. So I think this file is good. We'll cut one more for the other top of the bag, and then once we get this cut to the size we need, that'll fit right down over it. All right, looks like we had a successful second cut. Love that so much. Okay, so I went back into sheet cam and I deleted the hole that we had cut for our fitting for the top plates. So now basically you're just looking at what we need for the bottom plates. Just the outer cut and the two for the bolts that'll hold it to the bag. Well, we've got all 4 plates cut for our 2 rear bags, the tops and the bottoms. So now basically all we have to do is get underneath the car and figure out how tall our cups need to be for how much lift and how much drop we want out of the LeSabre. Okay, before we put the wheel and tire back on and set it down to compress the suspension, to start taking some measurements, this is what this size pipe looks like in here in comparison to that 4-inch one. That fits right in there as it should, because it's the same size as the spring. And even up top, fits right in there. And this will actually be inside that rubber dampener that'll sit up in there too. All right, we're set down on the wheel stands. I've got the lift arms just under the car still, just enough to let the weight of the car compress the suspension, but the lift arms are still there for safety. But this is why I built these, so I can do something like this, where I can have load on the suspension, but I can get under the car pretty easily. All right, welcome under the car. I just pulled my measurements. Let me show you guys what we're working with here. Right there is our upper perch, right? That's where our top bracket is gonna sit. And right here is the bottom of the control arm. That's where our bottom bracket's gonna sit. So I've measured up through the control arm, up to the top, and then down to the bottom of the cup here where our bracket's gonna sit. And we have 8 inches exactly. And luckily, we have 8 inches over there too. So we're sitting level. So knowing that that's our shortest distance when this car is going to be aired out, let's go back to the table and we'll do some math and crunch some numbers. Okay, so I've got my plates bolted onto the bags. We've got our top plate here and our bottom plate. And knowing that we have 8 inches of distance between the control arm and the upper perch when the car is aired out, these airhouse 2 bags collapse to a mere 2 inches and expands to 8.5 inches, which means we get 6.5 inches of lift out of this airbag. So basically what I'm gonna do is make our top piece just about 3 inches and our bottom piece just about 3 inches, because that's 6 and then this 2 gives us 8. Now obviously we have the thickness of these plates to contend with, and that's about 3/8 of an inch total, because this is 3/16, 3/16, 3/8. So probably what I'll do is I'll cut these to 3 inches first so we don't undercut, and then maybe tack weld them together, put it in the car, and see if we get the same overall height from the fender arc to the wheel stand. And as long as we get that same distance, we'll know that we're still completely collapsed in our suspension. All right, so I think we have our preliminary pieces cut. This taller piece will go on the top, and this 2-inch piece will go on the bottom. Depending on what I decide to do with the shock situation, we might switch these up. But that there is pretty much what the rear setup's gonna look like, I think. And where our air fitting is, we'll make that relief cut, maybe even just hole saw it. I've done that before. Well, we've got our hole cut, and I cleaned up the edges, kind of deburred it, put a round file through the inside there. That fitting is gonna go down a little bit more when we tighten it in, but since that's NPT, it's not gonna go all the way. The airline that's gonna pass through this is not gonna be yanked around because the top of this airbag is gonna be fixed to the body of the car, and the airline is going into the body of the car. The lower part of the airbag is what's going to be moving separate from the body on the lower control arm, which is why it's a good rule of thumb, if you can, run your airlines out of the top of your airbag, because the suspension is what's constantly moving under shock load and under vibrations of the road. And all right, well, I have the first pair of rear brackets welded. I basically just tack welded them. They'll hold the weight of the car, and once we know for sure these are the heights that we're gonna want, then I'll finish weld them up. Once we get this whole thing assembled and in the car, I think I'm gonna wanna put some shop air to them to articulate the suspension so I can see what the bag does over the side of the plates, essentially, at full lift and at full compression. Well, we've got the first rear setup in, and already I am super stoked on this design. Using the 5.5-inch outer diameter pipe was the move because it's the same diameter as the spring, so everything fits in super tight already. Like, it's in this bottom cup of this control arm as tight as the spring normally would sit. And up in here, we have yet to put the rubber upper piece on, but that'll help tighten that up and keep it from being loud. You know, when you're going down the road and that's moving around, even though the weight of the car presses down on it, that rubber will help keep it real quiet. I'm real happy so far with where the bag will sit. We'll put the wheel and tire on, we'll put it down on the stands again to load the suspension, to get the cups to actually seat into their positions. And from there, we'll be able to tell if the bag rubs on anything. But already on the tall side of the control arm here, it doesn't seem like the bag's touching anywhere. Now, when it aired down, I just kind of kept an eye on it to make sure nothing rubbed, nothing hit, and it's not touching the wall at any location around the airbag there. Over there on the dry erase board, I took this measurement from our wheel stand here to the top of our fender arch, and that distance was 23 inches. And now that we've got our airbag in there, compressed with our custom cups, 23 on the mark. Now, since these Airhouse 2 bags have 6.5 inches of lift, I'm pretty sure we're gonna be fine, you know, because there is a chance that we've bottomed out the shock and there's still more of compression for the airbag to go, which means we would lose all of the lift that we could potentially use. It's a little tight getting in here with the ball joint still connected, but it'd be nice to be able to get this thing in and out without having to separate the lower ball joint and drop in the control arm. There we go. Takes a little bit of a fight. This brake line guide is rubbing on the bag already, so we're gonna have to do something about that. The brake cable itself sits pretty close to that bag, but the wire guide is gonna have to get wrapped tighter or something. You can see there, it's actually touching the airbag, but the line isn't. So I think maybe what I'll do is we'll take this bolt out. I'll put a mark on the actual wire guide as to like whereabouts the brake cable comes through, and maybe cut it and bend it so we can basically cut the excess of that guide off. Okay. Yeah, that'll hold. That might be all we really needed to do. That's much better. Well, you guys probably can't see it too well, but we aren't rubbing on anything. We're not touching the e-brake cable or the guide, which is great. We're free and clear of everything, all around. That's great news. All right, we got the rear airbags out of the car, and we'll finish weld them up since we've only tacked them. I just spent entirely too much time grinding all my welds down, kind of went OD on it and just kind of beveled all the edges. It's going to be better in case the airbag does for some reason fold over, which we've kind of already tested and it's not going to do that, but I just don't like having sharp edges anywhere near airbags. So we're closing in on finishing all of the fabrication on these, but there's one more thing I want to add to the bottom cups here, and that's an anti-spin solution. And what I've done in the past is I've just taken some solid rod and welded it to the side of the cup and drilled a hole in the bottom of the control arm. Actually, we have a hole already. I just don't know if that's going to line up. But basically just weld a piece of rod off the bottom of the lower cup and slide that down through a hole in the control arm. And that would just basically keep the airbag from spinning on us, which could in turn pull our airline out, which would deflate the bag in motion on the road, which would be not ideal. I think I have some rod right here. Boy, I love this steel rack I built here in the shop. Railing acts as a safety railing between the floor heights, but also I can hang my long stock of metal right here on the rack. All right, well, we got our hole drilled and cleaned up, deburred. See if I can film this going in maybe. Just like that. It's a little longer than it really needs to be, but it's all right. All right, well, I got these things prepped and painted. We've got our locator anti-rotate pins welded in. Everything's good to go. Let's final assemble these things and we'll get them put in the car. So I'm also going to run all of my airlines through the car. We're going to plumb the car in this episode as well. That way all my airlines end up in the trunk where we're ultimately going to build the management setup. All right, we are assembled, painted, and assembled. All right, our rear bags are in. Now all we got to do is run some airlines to them. All right, we're back up in the air, getting a good look underneath as to how we're going to route our airlines. It's crucial to make sure we don't run airlines anywhere near spinning or oscillating or articulating components, right? We wouldn't want to run an airline through here because this control arm moves. We wouldn't want to wrap an airline around the sway bar because that moves, you know? Like basically, I shouldn't say common sense because, you know, when some people look at parts under a car when they're not moving, they might forget that they move. Underneath here, this here is the subframe I was talking about that the control arms mount to. And I think we might go straight up into our spare tire tub where that access like plate is. And that is right atop this slot, directly atop it. Need a longer drill bit. I think that'll work. This is far too long. All right, pilot hole drilled. Let's get in the trunk. All right, we're going right down through the center. It's gonna be the best place to run our airlines up and into the trunk. This is a 7/8 grommet I've got a 7/8 hole saw. We're gonna run down through the center of that. And the 7/8 grommet, the opening, like the ID of this grommet, is large enough to pass 5 1/4-inch plastic air lines through it. Now 5, because we have 4 for our corner bags, so we've got 1 going to each bag, and then we've got our dump. So basically when you air the car down, that air has to go somewhere. So there's an outlet out of the manifold for your exhaust, essentially. So when you air down, the air gets purged out of the manifold and out of an airline rather than just inside the trunk. And then when we do our management later on in another episode, we'll figure out where exactly all the airlines can go underneath the spare tire, how they can get guided together and come up from underneath the false floor carpet and make it nice and hidden. All right, I got the airlines run in the LeSabre. Across the passenger side over to the driver's side, the two met up and followed my brake lines. I was able to get above most of my OEM hangers. You can see how all the lines go through this clamp here, went over the top of that, and then turned here with it and was able to stay above and through all of my factory clips, essentially. All right, I got all 4 wheels on the car, brought the car down. Everything's plumbed, all zip ties trimmed. Everything's up and out of the way. And I labeled my airlines as they came in, because as you can tell, in this state, you wouldn't know what you were looking at and what line went where. So we've got our rear left, we've got our rear right, we've got our front left, and then the one that's not labeled, this one here, is our front right. So what I'm gonna do real quick so we can articulate the suspension is I'm going to tee the front off, tee the rear off with some push to connect fittings. And just like you saw in the last episode, run a Schrader valve off of those tees so we can use the air here in the shop to make the car go up and down. Because we have not pulled interior, we haven't wired the car, we haven't done our management yet. That'll be in the next episode. All right, putting some air in the front bags now. I heard a move. All right, here we go. We'll start tapping the rears up a little bit, and we'll make sure everything inflates as it should. All right, we have 100 PSI in the front and the rear. Let's set it down off the lift onto the wheel stands, and yeah, we'll see what happens. Whoa, we have a lot of lift. Holy cow. That's so much lift. No way. The reason why we have this kind of lift is because I'm only going as low as the stock shock in the rear will compress. Because of the wheels we have, which we do have now, the wheels we have, the fitment I want, and for how low the car will go with the engine cradle in the front, that's all we need in the back, right? We don't want reverse rake. So we're gonna have far more lift in the rear than the front. Full droop in the front, full lift in the rear. We will be stadium seating in this car driving everywhere. It is so much higher in the rear than I ever would have expected it to be. That's full lift in the front. Look at this. Oh my goodness. The Universal Airhouse 2 bag has 6.5 inches of lift. And the way I've designed this rear bracket kit on these bags in the LeSabre, was to utilize all the lift possible, and we've definitely done that. Okay, so the main thing I want to make sure of right now is that we are at 23 inches from the ground to the top of our fender arch. And that's because that's where we were at with just the shock in there. No spring at all on this wheel and tire combo. We were at 23 inches. So I want to make sure that nothing that we've built today that's in the car now, the brackets, the airbag, all that stuff, is causing this to not be at 23 inches or higher. 23 on the dot. It's actually a little bit lower than 23. And that could be from tire pressure or just the weight of the car finally. You know, we're on the actual ground. I just peeked under the front and we're actually laying engine cradle now on those wheels and tires. I think we're good. Our airline isn't rubbing on anything. Our bag isn't rubbing on anything. Well, I think we're good on the rear here. Both sides, nothing's rubbing, nothing's obstructing our airlines, our airbags, everything looks clear there. So I think we're good. I think this rear end is gonna be a great setup for this car. This thing just looks so good on the stock wheels with those wire wheel covers. I think we can officially say that the Buick LeSabre is bagged. Although we don't have any of the air suspension management in the trunk, no wiring done, we can't control it from inside the car. It sits on air suspension, front and rear. It airs up and down. So that's all of our time for this episode. I'm super stoked with how this car is coming together. Really happy with the setup we have in the rear. I know that we're not going all the way to the ground. Trust me, I know. I would love to be tearing this thing apart and raising the front engine cradle and raising the motor and putting the sills on the floor of this car. The whole plan was to just daily drive this car, but to finally bag one, because I've always wanted to bag an H-body GM car. And that's kind of my justification for buying it, but also my justification for not turning this into a full-fledged project. I have enough body dropped projects here on the channel, here in the shop. So if you're new to the channel because of the LeSabre build and you want to see some ultra low body drop content, I've got it for you guys. We've got it right here on the channel. I've got a few of those projects here. The Buick shirts are in production. They're being printed as I'm recording this. We're still a couple weeks out from the drop though. We're gonna release the Ludwig's Garage Buick LeSabre drop on Friday, June 20th. So mark your calendars. Friday, June 20th, the Buick drop will go live at ludwigsgarage.com. So until then, we still have a few more episodes to go on the LeSabre. Next one, we're gonna be building the trunk setup. We're gonna get all of our management set up, the tank, the compressor, the manifold. We'll sort out all the plumbing, we'll wire the car, and then we'll be putting the wheels on and doing all of the final critiquing needed to get the fitment we want and have the final look of the LeSabre all put together and ready for daily driver use. So, I want to thank you guys again for watching. I'm seriously so stoked we're doing this. I really appreciate all of your support. I hope to see you guys in the next episode. I will see you then.